There is a mansion in the interior of Brazil where no owner has ever lived in peace. Built with the blood and suffering of enslaved people, every stone of this property carries an indelible mark of cruelty. Over generations, entire families were destroyed by inexplicable tragedies, mysterious deaths, and complete financial ruin. Coincidence, or the inevitable price for crimes that history tried to forget? This is the true story of the mansion of the Bloodline curse, where the past never forgives. Leave your opinion in the comments. Do you believe that places can carry the weight of past atrocities? The year is 1847. The Paraíba Valley, in the province of São Paulo, is experiencing its golden age. Coffee plantations stretch as far as the eye can see, transforming modest landowners into powerful barons overnight. It is in this context of rapid wealth and limitless ambition that Colonel Rodrigo Almeida Castanheira arrives in the region. Colonel Castanheira is not a military man in the traditional sense. His title, like that of many others at the time, is honorary, granted by political influence and the size of his landholdings. He's a tall man, with a thick beard and penetrating eyes that reveal an iron will. He comes from Minas Gerais with a clear objective: to build a coffee empire that will make his name echo through future generations. He acquires thousands of hectares of virgin land, fertile and perfect for coffee cultivation. But his greatest ambition is not just the plantation. He wants a mansion that reflects his power, a residence that makes other farmers envious, a monument to his own greatness. The construction begins in 1848. Colonel Castanheira brings in a Portuguese architect who has worked on important buildings in Rio de Janeiro. The project is audacious. A 3-story mansion with more than 40 rooms, wide verandas with neoclassical columns, hand-painted Portuguese tiles, marble imported from Carrara, crystal chandeliers from France, and ironwork forged by the best craftsmen. But who will build this palace in the middle of the forest? The answer is as simple as it is brutal: enslaved people. The colonel owns more than 250 enslaved Africans and their descendants. Men, women, and even children are employed in the monumental construction. The working conditions are inhumane. The day begins before sunrise and ends only when darkness makes work impossible. Under the relentless sun of the Paraíba Valley, with temperatures exceeding 35 degrees Celsius, men carry stones that weigh more than 50 kilos. Women prepare mortar, carry water, and assist in tasks that require smaller hands. There is no rest, no compassion, no mercy. Colonel Castanheira personally oversees the work. He does not tolerate what he calls laziness. Any sign of fatigue, any pause considered excessive, is punished immediately. The colonel has installed a private pillory in the construction area. Punishments are public, deliberate, calculated to instill terror in the others. Among the enslaved people working on the construction is a woman named Benedita. She is 28 years old, mother of 3 children who work on the plantation. Benedita is known for her physical strength and ability to carry loads that would make many men succumb. But she is also known for something else: a dignity that not even the brutality of slavery can completely erase. One afternoon in March 1849, Benedita is carrying a stone slab up a steep ramp. The heat is suffocating. Sweat runs down her face, mixing with the dust that covers her skin. Her arms tremble with effort. Suddenly, her foot slips. The stone falls, breaking into several pieces. The overseer, a free man named Joaquim Torres, known for his cruelty, immediately approaches. He accuses Benedita of having dropped the stone on purpose, of sabotaging the work. Benedita tries to explain, but her words are interrupted by the first blow. The punishment is savage. Benedita is taken to the pillory and receives 50 lashes. But Colonel Castanheira, present at the time, is not satisfied. He orders that she be taken to one of the underground cell blocks, spaces that are being built beneath the mansion to serve as storage, but which already function as dungeons. Benedita remains there for 3 days without food, receiving only water once a day. On the 4th day, when they go to remove her to return to work, they find her dead. The official cause, according to the Colonel's records, is natural illness. But everyone who was there knows the truth. Benedita's body is buried in a hastily dug grave near the construction site. There is no ceremony, no prayer, no acknowledgement of her humanity. Just another hole in the ground, one more among many. The construction continues. In 1850, the mansion is finally completed. It is truly impressive. 3 floors of architectural splendor, gardens designed by a French landscaper, a private chapel decorated with sacred art brought from Portugal, stables that house purebred horses, and a large manor house that dominates the landscape like a stone giant. Colonel Castanheira moves in with his wife, Donna Esmeralda, and their 5 children. The inauguration is a grand event. Barons, viscounts, politicians from the provincial capital all come to admire what many already call the most beautiful mansion in the Paraíba Valley. Life in the mansion seems perfect. Lavish parties, French cuisine prepared by a chef, brought especially from Paris, imported wines, classical music filling the halls. The Castanheira family is at the apex of regional society. But then something happens that shakes this facade of perfection. In July 1851, Pedro, the colonel's eldest son and heir, 7 years old, disappears during an afternoon. The boy is found hours later in the farm's reservoir, drowned. The circumstances are never fully clarified. Some say he slipped while playing near the water. Others murmur that the boy seemed to be running from something or towards something when he fell. The death devastates Donna Esmeralda. She spends months secluded in her rooms, refusing to participate in social life. Colonel Castanheira, on the other hand, reacts with icy fury. He intensifies the discipline on the plantation, as if cruelty could fill the void left by the loss. But this is only the beginning, the first death in a long series that will span more than a century and a half. What do you think about what you've seen so far? Does this story make you reflect on the price of wealth built on suffering? Leave your opinion in the comments. The decades of 1850s and 60s are prosperous for Colonel Castanheira, at least financially. Coffee prices remain high, European demand is insatiable, and the plantation produces thousands of tons of beans annually. The mansion continues to impress visitors, and the colonel consolidates his position as one of the most influential men in the region. But behind the facade of success, the Castanheira family is slowly disintegrating. After Pedro's death, Donna Esmeralda never fully recovers. She develops what doctors of the time call melancholy, a deep depression that confines her increasingly to her rooms. In 1858, she dies during her sleep at only 39 years of age. The official cause is heart failure, but many believe it was simply a broken heart. The other 4 children grow up in an environment of emotional coldness. Colonel Castanheira, incapable of expressing affection, treats them with the same rigidity he uses with the enslaved people on the plantation. Discipline, obedience, productivity are the only values that matter. Then comes 1888, the date that will change everything. May 13th, the Golden Law is signed by Princess Isabel, abolishing slavery in Brazil. The news reaches the Paraíba Valley like a lightning bolt. Colonel Castanheira, now 73 years old, receives the news with a mixture of disbelief and rage. His entire fortune, his entire way of life is built on enslaved labor. He sees abolition not as an act of justice, but as theft, as an attack on his property rights. When the formerly enslaved people approach to discuss working conditions and wages, the colonel's response is categorical. He will not pay a single penny for work that in his view always belonged to him by right. He tells them to leave, that they can seek their fortune elsewhere, but not all leave. Many have nowhere to go. They were born on that land, their parents died there, their children know no other place. A tense standoff begins. On a June night in 1888, fire breaks out in the western part of the plantation. Thousands of coffee trees, ready for harvest, are consumed by flames. The damage is enormous. The financial loss is catastrophic. Investigations never determine the cause with certainty, but many suspect arson, an act of revenge by former enslaved people. Colonel Castanheira becomes obsessed with discovering the culprit. He hires armed men, intimidates workers, creates a climate of terror. But he never finds concrete evidence. Then, on a September morning, a worker finds Colonel Castanheira's body in one of the cell blocks beneath the mansion, the same place where Benedita died 39 years earlier. The scene is disturbing. The colonel is lying on the cold stone floor, his eyes open, an expression of absolute terror on his face. There are no visible signs of violence, no wounds, no indications of a struggle. Doctors are unable to determine the cause of death with certainty. They speak of cardiac arrest, of a sudden stroke, but the expression on the old man's face suggests something else, something they cannot explain. The death shakes the region. Some see it as divine justice, others as simple coincidence. But former enslaved people, especially the older ones who remember Benedita, murmur among themselves that certain debts are always paid, one way or another. The colonel's children inherit the property, but they are not united. Decades of emotional coldness and rigid discipline have created deep rifts between them. They begin to fight over inheritance, each wanting a larger share, each believing themselves more deserving. Rodrigo Jr., the oldest surviving son, takes over the administration of the mansion and plantation, but he lacks his father's ability, or perhaps his cruelty. Without enslaved labor, and without resources to adequately pay workers, production plummets. Debts begin to accumulate. In 1892, Rodrigo Jr. is found dead in the mansion's stables. He has a gunshot wound to the head, and a revolver is beside his body. The official verdict is suicide, driven by financial pressures and the weight of failure. But his brothers and sisters question this version, insinuating murder, although they never present concrete evidence. The second brother, Augusto, tries to save what is left. He sells part of the land, reduces the size of the plantation, tries to modernize production. But coffee prices begin to fall. Competition from other regions increases, and the economic situation continues to deteriorate. Augusto lives in the mansion for only 3 years before dying of yellow fever in 1895. His widow and children quickly abandon the property, moving to the provincial capital, refusing to return. The youngest sister, Cecilia, inherits the mansion by default. As the other heirs want nothing to do with the property, she tries to maintain a life there, but strange things begin to happen. Servants report hearing voices in the cell blocks, especially at night. Voices that seem to come from the walls themselves. Murmurs in languages they do not recognize, sometimes screams that make them wake up in terror. Objects disappear and reappear in different places. Doors close by themselves. Candles extinguish without wind. Cecilia, a rational and practical woman, initially dismisses these reports as superstition and imagination. But soon, she herself begins to experience disturbing phenomena. She wakes up in the middle of the night with the sensation that someone is in her room, watching her. She hears footsteps in empty corridors. She sees shadows moving where there should be no one. In 1898, Cecilia abandons the mansion. She simply packs her belongings and leaves, refusing to ever speak about what made her go. She moves to Rio de Janeiro and never returns to the Paraíba Valley. The mansion stands empty for years. The gardens become overgrown. The structure begins to deteriorate. The once magnificent building becomes a decaying ruin. Local residents begin to avoid the area, especially at night. Stories circulate, each more sinister than the last. In 1904, a distant cousin of the Castanheira family tries to revive the property. He lasts 6 months before fleeing in the middle of the night, taking only what he can carry. He never explains what happened, but those who see him say his hair has turned completely white, despite being only 32 years old. The mansion gains a reputation. It is no longer just the Castanheira house. It becomes the cursed mansion, the place where owners pay the price. And the price everyone knows is always high. Thank you immensely for staying with us this far. The best is yet to come. The first decades of the 20th century bring relative economic prosperity to Brazil, but the mansion in the Paraíba Valley remains abandoned, a dark monument to a past that refuses to be forgotten. The coffee plantations have been completely abandoned, the land is taken over by secondary forest, and the building itself deteriorates year after year. But in 1922, a new family decides to challenge the mansion's reputation. The Mendonça family comes from São Paulo. Alfredo Mendonça is a successful industrialist who made his fortune in the textile business. He sees the property as an opportunity, a place where he can establish a country estate for his family, far from the chaos of the growing capital. Alfredo hears the stories, of course, but he is a modern man, educated in Europe, a believer in science and reason. He dismisses the tales as rural superstition, ignorance of uneducated people who cannot distinguish reality from fantasy. He invests a considerable fortune in restoring the mansion, brings in engineers, architects, specialized workers. In 2 years, the building regains much of its former glory. The structure is reinforced, the rooms are redecorated, modern utilities are installed, including electricity and indoor plumbing, true luxuries for the time. The Mendonça family moves in 1924. Alfredo, his wife Helena, and their 3 children, Carlos, 15 years old, Beatriz, 12, and little Miguel, just 6. The first months seem to confirm Alfredo's optimistic vision. The family adapts well, the children explore the extensive grounds. Helena organizes the household with typical efficiency. Life seems normal, even pleasant. But then incidents begin to occur. Little Miguel starts having nightmares. He wakes up screaming, saying he sees people in his room, people in old clothes who look at him sadly. Helena attributes it to child imagination, to the adjustment to a new place. Then Beatriz begins to complain. She says she hears whispers when she is in certain parts of the house, especially near the old cell blocks that Alfredo has kept closed for safety reasons. She says sometimes she feels hands touching her hair, her shoulders, even when she is completely alone. Carlos, the oldest, develops an inexplicable aversion to the mansion. He begins to spend more and more time outside, refusing to enter certain rooms. When questioned, he is unable to explain exactly what bothers him, just says the place does not feel right. Alfredo remains skeptical, but Helena begins to worry. She herself begins to notice strange things. Doors that were closed in the morning are found open in the afternoon. Objects that were on one table appear on another. A persistent feeling of being watched, especially when she is in the library or the old master bedroom. Then, in March 1926, tragedy strikes. Miguel disappears one afternoon. The family searches frantically. Employees comb the grounds. Local police are called. Hours of anguish pass before the boy is found. He is in one of the cell blocks. The door, which was always kept locked, is open. Miguel is lying on the cold stone floor, unconscious. When he is finally revived by doctors, he is in a state of shock, unable to speak for days. When he finally begins to talk, his story is disturbing. He says a woman called him, a woman in old clothes who smiled and gestured for him to follow. He says he went down to the cell block, and the woman was there along with many other people, all looking at him with sad eyes. He says he tried to leave but could not find the door. He says he was there for a long time, Though only 2 hours had passed, doctors diagnose shock and trauma. They recommend rest and distance from the place that triggered the episode. But Alfredo is not yet convinced it is time to give up on his investment. 2 months later, Beatrice disappears. This time, the search is more desperate, more urgent. They find her after only 1 hour, but the circumstances are even more disturbing. She is in the mansion's reservoir, the same place where Pedro Castanheira drowned 75 years earlier. She is floating face down, her clothes soaked, her body cold. When they pull her out, to everyone's relief, she is still breathing, but barely. Beatrice spends 3 days in a coma. When she wakes, her story is confusing, almost delirious. She says she saw her brother Miguel near the water, that he was calling her. But Miguel was in the house the whole time, watched by his mother. She says when she got to the water, someone pushed her. But there was no one there. This is the breaking point for Helena. She demands that they leave, that they abandon the mansion immediately. Alfredo, finally recognizing that something is fundamentally wrong, agrees. The Mendonça family leaves in May 1926. They never return. Alfredo tries to sell the property but cannot find buyers. The stories have spread, been amplified. The mansion returns to being empty. In 1935, another attempt is made. Jerónimo Tavares is a Portuguese businessman who immigrated to Brazil in the beginning of the century. He has prospered in commerce and sees the mansion as an opportunity to establish a luxury hotel, a destination for wealthy people seeking to escape the heat of Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo during the summer. Tavares is even more skeptical than Alfredo was. He attributes the Mendonça family's problems to coincidences and the suggestible psychology of people who already believed in curses. He is certain that with proper management and modern marketing, the mansion can be transformed into a profitable enterprise. The investment is substantial. He not only restores the building, but also builds additional accommodations, a restaurant, extensive leisure facilities. The hotel opens in 1937 with a grand event that attracts personalities from high society. The first year is promising. Guests come, many are impressed by the mansion's beauty and history. Reviews are generally positive. Tavares seems to have proven that rationality and business acumen can overcome superstition. But then accidents begin to occur. A guest falls down the main staircase, breaking her leg. Another complains of being locked in his room from the outside, though investigation shows the door was never locked. A couple reports having their belongings moved during the night, arranged in strange patterns they did not create. Employees begin to quit. They report the same things: voices in empty corridors, shadows that move independently, objects that disappear and reappear, a persistent feeling of discomfort in certain areas of the building. Finding replacements becomes increasingly difficult as the mansion's reputation spreads. Financially, the hotel begins to fail. Reservations decrease, negative reviews increase, operational costs remain high. Tavares invests more and more of his own money, determined not to admit failure. In 1940, his wife Anna leaves him. She says she can no longer bear the obsession, the financial pressure, the atmosphere of the place. She takes their 2 children and returns to Portugal. Tavares remains alone, determined to turn the situation around. But the decline is inexorable. In 1942, with the hotel practically empty and debts that have consumed his entire fortune, Jerónimo Tavares takes his own life. He is found in the old master bedroom, the same room where Colonel Castanheira slept, where Donna Esmeralda died of melancholy. Tavares has taken an overdose of sleeping pills. He leaves a note, but its content is never made public. Those who read it say it is rambling, incoherent, filled with references to voices and presences that gave him no peace. The hotel closes permanently. The mansion once again stands empty. During the following decades, some brave or desperate people try to occupy the building. A religious group wants to transform it into a retreat house, but leaves after 3 months. A spiritualist center attempts to establish itself there, believing they can help trapped spirits, but even they abandon the project after disturbing occurrences that they cannot explain or control. In 1967, during renovation work to try to stabilize the structure, workers make a macabre discovery. While digging in the area around the old cell blocks, they find bones, many bones. Forensic examination reveals the remains of at least 40 people, all buried in shallow, unmarked graves. Carbon dating and anthropological analysis indicate they are from the 19th century, from the slavery period. Among the remains, they find evidence of violence, fractured skulls, signs of malnutrition, marks on bones indicating use of shackles. These are people who died under brutal conditions and were buried without ceremony, without recognition, without dignity. One of the skeletons is identified with relative certainty. Metal fragments and fabric remnants correspond to descriptions in Colonel Castanheira's old records. It is Benedita, the woman who died during the mansion's construction. The discovery attracts media attention. Newspapers run stories. Historians begin to investigate the mansion's past more deeply. What they find is disturbing. Colonel Castanheira's records, preserved in regional archives, reveal a systematic pattern of cruelty. Detailed records of punishments, lists of enslaved people who died without proper burial, descriptions of methods used to maintain discipline that can only be classified as torture. The numbers are staggering. In the 28 years that Colonel Castanheira operated the plantation, at least 180 enslaved people died under his ownership. The official mortality rate was more than 7 times higher than the already high average of other plantations in the region. These revelations transformed the mansion's perception. It is no longer just a place of tragedies and supernatural occurrences. It is a historical crime scene, a monument to atrocities that society preferred to forget. The question that everyone begins to ask is no longer whether the mansion is cursed, but why anyone would be surprised that a place built on so much suffering could ever bring peace to its occupants. The 1980s and 90s bring a new wave of interest in the mansion, but for different reasons. Historians, anthropologists, and activists for racial justice begin to see the property not as a curiosity or a horror story, but as an important document of Brazil's slavery past. A movement emerges to preserve the mansion and transform it into a museum and educational center about slavery. The proposal is that rather than hide or demolish the building, it should be maintained as a stark reminder of the atrocities that were committed and their lasting impact. But this is when the most detailed investigations into the mansion's past are conducted, and what is discovered goes beyond what anyone imagined. In 1984, Professor Marta Oliveira, a historian specializing in slavery in the Paraíba Valley, obtains access to personal documents of the Castanheira family that were kept in a bank vault. Among these documents is something extraordinary: Colonel Castanheira's personal diary. The diary covers the years 1847 to 1885. It is a disturbing document, written in meticulous handwriting, detailing not only the plantation's daily operations, but also the colonel's personal reflections and justifications for his actions. What Professor Oliveira finds is chilling. Colonel Castanheira did not see his cruelty as a moral failing. On the contrary, he believed he was performing a civilizing mission. He wrote that enslaved Africans were inferior beings who needed to be disciplined and controlled for their own good and for the good of society. But even more disturbing are the detailed descriptions of punishments. The diary contains records that can only be described as torture methods. The colonel did not just punish to maintain order, he experimented. He documented which punishments were most effective in breaking the spirit without permanently damaging the slave's ability to work. One entry from November 1853 is particularly revealing. The colonel describes a punishment method he developed. He says it is more effective than whipping because it leaves no visible marks that could reduce the enslaved person's value if resale became necessary. The method involves prolonged isolation in the cell blocks, combined with sleep deprivation and controlled starvation. He calls it his educational method. There are entries about Benedita. The colonel wrote about her 3 times. The first describes her as a valuable worker, strong and capable. The second describes the incident with the dropped stone, but from a very different perspective. The colonel says he made an example of Benedita because she looked him in the eyes when the overseer accused her, which he interpreted as defiance that needed to be crushed. The third entry is from 5 days after Benedita's death. It is brief. The colonel notes that she died during disciplinary isolation and that she was buried according to standard procedures. Then he adds a single sentence that reveals his complete lack of remorse, regrettable loss of property, but necessary for maintaining order. Professor Oliveira also discovers something else in the documents. There are death certificates, dozens of them, all dated between 1850 and 1888. But when she compares these certificates with the colonel's diary, a disturbing discrepancy emerges. The official causes of death listed on the certificates are invariably natural: fevers, infections, heart problems, accidents. But the diary tells a different story. Many of these deaths occurred after punishments. Some occurred in the cell blocks. Others occurred under circumstances that the colonel himself describes as consequences of disciplinary measures. In other words, the colonel falsified death certificates to hide the extent of the violence on his property. With the complicity or indifference of local authorities, he created an official narrative that masked the reality of systematic brutality. This documentation has a profound impact. It becomes the foundation for a lawsuit filed by descendants of people enslaved on the Castanheira plantation. The lawsuit does not seek financial compensation, which would be impossible to calculate or fairly distribute. Instead, it seeks official recognition of the crimes committed and transformation of the mansion into a site of historical memory. In 1993, a remarkable event occurs. The regional government organizes a public meeting at the mansion itself to discuss its future. Among those invited is a woman named Irene dos Santos, 94 years old. Donna Irene is the granddaughter of Benedita. Her presence at the meeting is emotional and powerful. In a voice that age has not weakened, Donna Irene tells the story that was passed down to her by her mother, Benedita's eldest daughter, who survived and was freed after abolition. She speaks of Benedita not as a statistic or a historical footnote, but as a person, a woman who sang while she worked, a mother who made toys for her children out of corn husks and scraps of fabric, a person who had dreams, hopes, dignity. Donna Irene speaks of how her mother lived with the trauma of seeing Benedita taken to the cell block, how she waited 3 days, hoping her mother would return, how she learned of her death from other enslaved people who whispered the news with tears in their eyes. She speaks of something else too, a tradition that was passed down among the descendants of people enslaved on the Castanheira plantation, a saying that was repeated through generations: "No blood of masters will find peace on this land." Donna Irene is asked if she believes the mansion is cursed. Her response is measured and profound. She says she does not know about curses in the supernatural sense, but she knows about historical debts. She knows that a society that builds wealth on brutality and then refuses to acknowledge this past is a society that will be haunted by what it refuses to confront. She says the mansion is not cursed by spirits of the dead. It is cursed by the living who insist on forgetting. Her testimony is recorded and becomes part of the official archive. Many who are present say it is the most powerful moment of the entire process of deciding the mansion's fate. In 1998, after years of legal battles and public debate, a decision is finally made. The mansion will be preserved and transformed into a museum of slavery memory. The project includes restoration of the building, archaeological excavation of the grounds to properly identify and honor all those buried there, and creation of educational exhibits that will tell the full, unvarnished story of what occurred on that land. But there is resistance. Some of Colonel Castanheira's descendants oppose the project. They argue that focusing on the past's dark aspects dishonors the family name. They claim that slavery was a product of its time, and that judging historical figures by modern moral standards is unfair. This resistance delays implementation of the museum. Legal appeals are filed. Funding is blocked. The project stagnates. Meanwhile, the mansion continues to deteriorate. Without proper maintenance, with only minimal security to prevent vandalism, the building decays year by year. And the stories continue. Even in its abandoned state, people report strange occurrences. Urban explorers who enter illegally speak of voices, of presences, of an atmosphere so oppressive that many leave quickly, unable to bear being inside for more than a few minutes. In 2005, a group of filmmakers gets permission to document the mansion. They plan to create a documentary about slavery in Brazil, using the mansion as a central visual element. The filming is plagued by technical problems. Equipment malfunctions without apparent cause. Cameras record strange audio that no one heard during filming. The crew becomes increasingly uncomfortable, reporting feelings of being watched, of hostility in the very atmosphere. The documentary is completed but has limited release. The director says in an interview that the experience changed his perspective. He went there thinking the mansion's reputation was just folklore. He left uncertain about what he believes, but certain that the place affects people in ways that are difficult to explain or dismiss. The mansion remains in limbo, not fully abandoned but not transformed, a site of unresolved history, literally and figuratively. A place where the past refuses to be buried and the present refuses to fully confront it. 2010 marks a turning point in the mansion's story, though not the resolution that many hoped for. The Museum of Slavery Memory Project is officially abandoned. A combination of lack of funding, continued resistance from Castanheira family descendants, and political changes in the regional government mean that the initiative never becomes reality. The mansion is officially designated as a protected historical site, which means it cannot be demolished, but no resources are allocated for its preservation or transformation. It is a bureaucratic solution that resolves nothing, preserving the property in law while allowing it to decay in fact. Nature begins to reclaim the land. Vines climb the walls, roof tiles fall, allowing rain to enter and accelerate the interior's deterioration. Windows are broken, whether by vandals or simply by time. The gardens, once meticulously maintained, become an impenetrable jungle of wild growth. Local residents continue to avoid the area. Parents warn children not to go near the old mansion. Stories are passed from generation to generation, each adding new details, new incidents, new reasons to stay away. But the internet brings new attention. The mansion becomes something of a pilgrimage site for paranormal enthusiasts, urban explorers, and people fascinated by dark history. Despite prohibitions and warnings, people continue to enter. Their reports, posted on blogs, forums, and social media, are remarkably consistent. Almost everyone mentions an oppressive atmosphere. Many report hearing sounds, voices, footsteps, whispers in languages they do not recognize. Some report visual phenomena, shadows that move in ways that shadows should not move, glimpses of figures that vanish when looked at directly. Skeptics attribute these experiences to psychology. The power of suggestion, they say. People who visit expecting to experience something supernatural inevitably interpret normal phenomena through that lens. Creaking wood becomes footsteps, wind through broken windows becomes voices, shadows from moving clouds become apparitions. And perhaps they are right. Perhaps there is nothing supernatural about the mansion at all. But that misses the point. The mansion does not need ghosts to be haunted. It is haunted by history itself. Every stone was laid by people whose labor was stolen. Every elegant architectural detail represents suffering that built it. The very foundation is constructed on systematic dehumanization and violence. The cell blocks still exist, dark and cold. The walls that heard screams still stand. The ground where bodies were buried in unmarked graves still covers those remains. This is the true haunting, not spirits of the dead refusing to rest, but a society refusing to reckon with what was done. In 2015, on the 127th anniversary of abolition, a group of activists organizes an unauthorized ceremony at the mansion. They bring flowers and light candles. They read the names of all the people who died on the Castanera plantation, whose names could be recovered from historical records. 180 names. They also read a statement for all those whose names were lost, whose deaths were never properly recorded, whose very existence was reduced to entries in a ledger as property rather than people. The ceremony is respectful, solemn, necessary. But when it ends, the activists leave and the mansion remains as it was, empty, deteriorating, unresolved. There are occasional new proposals to do something with the property. Every few years, someone suggests converting it into a hotel, a restaurant, an event venue. These proposals are always met with opposition, some from preservationists who want the site maintained for its historical significance, some from people who believe such commercial use would be inappropriate, and some from those who simply believe the place should be left alone. None of these proposals advance very far. In 2020, during the pandemic, when people around the world are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about inequality and structural injustice, there is renewed interest in the mansion's story. Articles are written, podcasts discuss it. It becomes part of a larger conversation about historical memory and accountability. But still, nothing changes for the mansion itself. Today, in 2025, the situation remains essentially the same. The mansion continues its slow collapse. Occasionally, local authorities conduct minimal maintenance to prevent complete structural failure, but nothing more. The property remains protected by law, but neglected in practice. There is something deeply symbolic about this. The mansion has become a perfect metaphor for how societies often deal with difficult pasts. We acknowledge that terrible things happened. We may even officially recognize them, but we do not fully confront them. We do not transform that recognition into meaningful action or genuine reconciliation. The mansion stands as a monument, but not the kind anyone intended. Not a monument to Colonel Castanhayra's wealth or power. Not a monument to architectural achievement, but a monument to unresolved history, to crimes acknowledged but not truly confronted, to victims remembered but not honored. The question people ask is always the same. Is the mansion cursed? But perhaps the better question is, what does it mean to be cursed? If a curse is supernatural punishment by spirits of the dead, then who can say? No one can prove or disprove such things. The experiences of those who have lived there, or tried to live there, are real to them. Whether those experiences have supernatural causes or psychological ones may ultimately be irrelevant to those who suffered them. But if a curse is the inevitable consequence of actions, if it is the weight of history that a society refuses to carry properly, if it is the way that violence and injustice echo through time, affecting generation after generation, then yes, the mansion is cursed. It is cursed by what was done there, by the suffering that built it, by the deaths that were never properly mourned, by the dignity that was systematically denied, by the humanity that was refused to hundreds of people whose labor and lives were stolen, and it is cursed by what has not been done since, by the refusal to fully reckon with this past, by the resistance to transformation and education, by the tendency to want to forget rather than confront, by the society's failure to honor those who suffered and died there in any meaningful way. The families who tried to live in the mansion all left, driven away by tragedy or terror or simply an unbearable sense that something was fundamentally wrong. Each blamed the mansion, its history, its curse. But perhaps they were feeling something very real, the moral impossibility of living in comfort in a place built on such suffering without acknowledging it, without honoring those who were brutalized there, without transforming that space into something that serves memory and justice rather than forgetting and profit. Some descendants of enslaved people who worked on the Castanheira plantation say they are not surprised by the mansion's fate. They say their ancestors knew that certain things cannot be escaped, that blood calls out from the ground, that suffering leaves marks that do not fade with time. Whether this is literal or metaphorical may not matter. The truth it expresses is clear. Societies that build wealth on brutality and then refuse to fully acknowledge and address that past will be haunted by it. Not by ghosts, perhaps, but by the consequences of choices made and not made, of debts acknowledged but not paid, of victims recognized but not honored. The mansion of the Bloodline curse stands today as it has stood for years, slowly crumbling, overtaken by nature, avoided by most, visited by the curious few who dare. It is not the monument Colonel Castanheira intended. He wanted a palace that would make his name live forever, that would testify to his power and success. In a way, he got his wish. His name does live on, inseparably linked to this place, but not in the way he hoped. The mansion is his legacy, but not a proud one. It is a testament to the cost of his ambition, the price of his cruelty, and the impossibility of building lasting happiness on the foundation of other people's suffering. Every owner who came after paid that price. Not because of supernatural forces, perhaps, but because of the fundamental moral and psychological impossibility of living in peace in a place so steeped in injustice and pain. The mansion may stand for decades more, or it may finally collapse. The structure may eventually give way completely to time and neglect. The stones may scatter, the walls may fall, but the story will remain, the history will remain, the debt will remain. Because some things cannot be forgotten, no matter how much we might want to forget them. Some places carry the weight of what was done there, and some prices must eventually be paid, one way or another, by someone. This is not just the story of one mansion in the interior of Brazil. It is a story about how the past lives in the present, about how violence echoes through time, about how societies struggle with the moral weight of their own history, about the difference between acknowledging the past and truly reckoning with it. The mansion of the Bloodline curse is not unique. Around the world, there are places built on suffering, on injustice, on the exploitation and brutalization of human beings. Some are preserved as museums and educational sites. Many are not. Some are forgotten. Others are repurposed, their dark pasts buried beneath new uses and new stories. But the past is always there, whether we choose to see it or not. And places like this mansion remind us that we cannot build lasting peace on foundations of violence. We cannot create genuine prosperity by ignoring the suffering that funded it. We cannot move forward into a just future without honestly confronting an unjust past. The mansion waits, empty, decaying, unresolved. A question that has never been properly answered. A debt that has never been properly paid. A story that has never been properly concluded. And perhaps that is fitting. Because the larger story, the story of slavery's legacy in Brazil and throughout the Americas, is also unresolved. Also waiting for societies to fully confront what was done and what continues to echo from that past into the present. The curse of the mansion, if there is one, is not supernatural. It is historical. It is moral. It is the curse that falls on all who try to live in comfort while ignoring the suffering that made that comfort possible. And it is a curse that will remain until we find the courage to truly confront our past, to honor those who suffered, to acknowledge the full weight of historical injustice, and to commit ourselves to building a future that does not repeat the sins of the past. The mansion of the Bloodline curse stands, waiting, a monument to unfinished business, a reminder of debts unpaid, a warning that some prices cannot be avoided, only delayed. And the question it poses to all who hear its story is this: will we finally do the work of genuine historical reckoning, or will we continue to be haunted by what we refuse to face? This is not just a story of a cursed mansion. This is a story about the price of building wealth on human suffering, about how violence and injustice echo through generations, about how societies struggle to confront the darkest chapters of their own history. The mansion of the Bloodline curse remains standing in the Paraíba Valley, slowly being reclaimed by nature, a monument to crimes that were committed and justice that was never fully served. Every family that tried to make it their home left in tragedy. Not because of supernatural forces, but because some foundations are too stained with blood to ever support lasting peace. What do you think? Can places truly carry the weight of historical atrocities? Are we as a society doing enough to confront and honor the victims of slavery? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and this conversation is essential for all of us. If this story made you reflect on the hidden histories around us, please subscribe to the channel. We bring you true stories that reveal the hidden chapters of our past, stories that challenge us to think differently about history and its lasting impact. And do not miss the next recommended video. We have another deeply moving true story that will leave you speechless, a story of secrets, tragedy, and the undeniable power of the past. Thank you for watching.